The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Highway 287, painting the small town of Millbrook, Texas, in shades of amber and gold. Sarah Martinez stood behind the counter of Mel's diner, her reflection caught in the coffee pot's chrome surface, a reminder of what she'd lost and what remained. The black eye patch covering her left eye had become as much a part of her morning routine as brushing her teeth, though the weight of it still felt foreign after 8 months. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd learned to read the rhythm of that bell like a warning system. The gentle ring meant regulars, the kind folks who ordered their coffee black and left decent tips. The sharp, aggressive jangle usually meant trouble. This morning, it was the latter. "Well, well, well," drawled Tommy Brennan, sliding onto a stool with his usual smirk. At 25, Tommy had the kind of confidence that came from never having faced real hardship, his daddy's oil money cushioning every fall. "If it isn't our favorite pirate." Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her eye patch, then caught herself. She'd made a promise to herself months ago not to let them see her flinch. "Coffee, Tommy?" "Sure thing, One Eye." He leaned forward, his cologne mixing sickeningly with the scent of bacon grease. "Tell me, sweetheart, do you see half as much as you used to? Or does that thing just make everything look like a bad movie?" The coffee pot trembled slightly in Sarah's grip. She'd been a high school English teacher once, had commanded respect from rooms full of teenagers. Now she poured coffee for men who thought her disability was entertainment. "Your coffee," she said simply, setting the cup down with practiced steadiness. Tommy's friends, Brad and Mike, had taken a booth by the window. Their laughter carried across the diner like breaking glass. Sarah had taught Brad's younger sister once, back when she had 2 eyes and a future that stretched beyond the grease-stained walls of Mel's diner. "Hey, Sarah!" Mike called out, his voice carrying that particular tone that made her skin crawl. "My kid's got a school play next week. They need someone to play a pirate. You interested?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned that reacting only fed their cruelty. In the corner booth, nearly hidden behind the local newspaper, sat Jake Morrison. He'd been coming to the diner for 3 months now, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, eggs over easy, wheat toast. He never said much beyond please and thank you, but Sarah had noticed how his jaw tightened whenever the harassment began. Jake was different from the others. Where most men in Millbrook were either cowboys putting on a show or oil workers throwing their money around, Jake carried himself with quiet dignity. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that came from actual ranch work rather than weekend rodeos. His hands were calloused, his boots worn but well maintained. When he looked at her, she never saw pity or disgust, just a kind of respectful acknowledgement, as if her eye patch was no more significant than the color of her hair. "You know what I heard?" Tommy continued, his voice getting louder. "I heard she lost that eye in a car wreck, probably texting while driving, right, Sarah? Is that how you killed your—" "That's enough." The voice cut through the diner like a blade. Jake had folded his newspaper and was looking directly at Tommy, his brown eyes steady and cold. The entire diner fell silent. Tommy turned, his smirk faltering slightly. "Excuse me?" I said that's enough. Jake's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Finish your coffee and leave." "Now hold on there, cowboy." Tommy's voice had a nervous edge now. "This is a free country. I can say whatever I want." Jake stood slowly, his full height imposing in the small space. "You can, but you won't. Not here. Not to her." Sarah watched the confrontation with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She'd grown accustomed to fighting her own battles, or more accurately, to enduring them alone. The idea that someone might actually defend her felt both foreign and dangerous. Tommy looked around the diner, seeking support from his friends, but Brad and Mike were suddenly very interested in their breakfast. The other patrons, mostly older folks who'd known Sarah since she was a child, watched with expressions ranging from approval to uncomfortable silence. "Whatever, man," Tommy muttered, throwing a crumpled dollar bill on the counter. "This place is getting too weird for me anyway." As Tommy and his friends left, the bell above the door giving one final angry jangle, the diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But Sarah felt shaken in a way she hadn't experienced in months. Not by Tommy's cruelty, she'd grown a thick skin for that, but by Jake's unexpected intervention. She approached his table with the coffee pot, her hands steadier now. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jake looked up from his newspaper, his expression unreadable. "No need to thank me, just doing what's right." His voice had a slight drawl, but it was different from the exaggerated cowboy accent so many men in Millbrook affected. This was real, the product of years spent under the Texas sun, not a costume put on for effect. "I'm used to it," Sarah said, refilling his cup. "How you didn't have to—" "Maybe you're used to it," Jake interrupted gently. "Doesn't make it right." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that, like she was a person worthy of respect, rather than an object of pity or ridicule? "What's your name?" she asked, realizing that despite his regular visits, they'd never been properly introduced. "Jake Morrison. I work out at the Double R Ranch about 15 miles south." "Sarah Martinez." She hesitated, then added, "I used to teach at the high school." "Used to?" Sarah's hand moved unconsciously toward her eye patch again. "After the accident, It was hard to manage a classroom. The kids would stare, the parents would complain. Principal Morrison, no relation to you, I assume, suggested I take some time off. That was 8 months ago." Jake's expression darkened. "They fired you because of your eye." "Not officially, but they made it clear I wasn't welcome back." Sarah surprised herself by continuing, "I loved teaching. It was all I ever wanted to do." "What happened?" Jake's question was gentle, but Sarah saw genuine interest in his eyes, not the morbid curiosity she'd grown accustomed to. She glanced around the diner, making sure no one was listening. "Car accident. December 15th, around midnight. My fiancé David and I were driving back from Austin after seeing a show. It was raining and a drunk driver ran a red light." Her voice caught slightly. "David died instantly. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. When I woke up, they told me they couldn't save my left eye." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry." The simplicity of his response hit her harder than the elaborate condolences she'd received from others. No awkward platitudes about God's plan or everything happening for a reason, just genuine sympathy. "The worst part," Sarah continued, surprised by her own openness, "isn't losing the eye. It's losing who I used to be. I was confident, respected, I had plans. Now I pour coffee for people who think my pain is entertainment." "You're still the same person," Jake said quietly, "just dealing with different circumstances." Sarah looked at him sharply. "Are you? Are you the same person you were before whatever brought you to Millbrook?" Jake's smile was sad. "Touché. No, I suppose I'm not." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the bell chimed again. This time it brought Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who ran the town's only bookstore. Her kind eyes crinkled as she saw Sarah. "Morning, dear. Just coffee today." "Coming right up, Mrs. Henderson." As Sarah moved to serve the older woman, she felt Jake's eyes on her. When she glanced back, he was reading his newspaper again, but she caught the hint of a smile on his lips. The morning rush began in earnest, and Sarah found herself moving through the familiar routine of taking orders, pouring coffee, and delivering plates of eggs and bacon. But something felt different. Tommy's words still stung, but they seemed less important somehow. Jake's quiet defense had created a buffer between her and the cruelty she'd grown to expect. Around 10 o'clock, the diner began to empty. Jake finished his breakfast and left his usual modest tip, but instead of leaving immediately, he approached the counter. "Sarah," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I know this isn't my place, but if you ever need anything, I mean anything, I'm usually at the Double R. Just ask anyone in town how to find it." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of leather and something she couldn't quite identify. Maybe hope. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks, but Sarah found herself thinking about Jake's words. When had anyone last offered her help, without expecting something in return? When had anyone looked at her like she was more than her disability? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah cleaned the last of the tables and prepared to close. Her reflection in the diner's windows showed a woman who looked older than her 28 years, worn down by months of cruelty and isolation. But for the first time in a long time, she also saw something else, a flicker of the woman she used to be, strong, capable, worthy of respect. Maybe she thought it was time to stop accepting cruelty as inevitable. Maybe it was time to remember that she deserved better. 3 days had passed since Jake's intervention at the diner, and Sarah found herself scanning the room each morning, looking for his familiar silhouette in the corner booth. He hadn't returned, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his absence was somehow connected to his defense of her. The thought left her with an uncomfortable mixture of gratitude and guilt. The Tuesday morning crowd was thinner than usual, just a handful of truckers passing through, and old Pete Williams nursing his 3rd cup of coffee while complaining about the weather. Sarah was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed, and her heart did a small skip as she looked up to see Jake walking in. But something was different. His usual quiet confidence seemed strained, and there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He took his customary seat in the corner booth, but his gaze kept drifting to the windows, as if he were watching for something. "Morning, Jake," Sarah said, approaching with the coffee pot. "Haven't seen you in a few days." "Been busy at the ranch," he replied, but his tone was distant. "Boss had me working the north pasture, takes me out of town for a while." Sarah poured his coffee, noting the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for the cup. "You okay? You seem different." Jake's eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Fear. Real bone-deep fear that he was trying desperately to hide. "I'm fine," he said, but the words came out too quickly. "Just tired." Before Sarah could respond, the bell chimed again, and two men walked in. They weren't locals. Their clothes were too clean, too expensive. City clothes. They took a booth near the front, and Sarah noticed how Jake's entire body went rigid when he saw them. "I'll be right back," Sarah murmured, moving to serve the newcomers. "Coffee?" she asked, forcing a smile. The older of the two men, probably in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked up at her with barely concealed disgust. His gaze lingered on her eye patch, with the kind of cruel fascination she'd grown to despise. "Coffee, yeah," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "And maybe some information. We're looking for someone." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she poured. "Oh, someone local?" "Not exactly," the younger man said. He was maybe 30, with the kind of muscle that came from gyms rather than honest work. "Goes by Jake Morrison. About 6'2", brown hair, works at a ranch around here." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She glanced toward Jake's booth, but he was hidden behind his newspaper, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "There's a lot of ranches around here," she said carefully. "What do you need with him?" The older man's smile was cold as winter. "That's between us and him, sweetheart. Just point us in the right direction." "I don't know anyone by that name," Sarah lied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The younger man leaned forward. "You sure about that? Because we heard he's been spending a lot of time in this diner, and we know he's been using that name." The word "using" hung in the air like a threat. Sarah's mind raced. If Jake wasn't really Jake Morrison, then who was he? And why were these men looking for him? "Like I said," she repeated, "I don't know anyone by that name." The older man studied her for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. "You know what I think? I think you're lying, and I think you know exactly who we're talking about." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "I think you're mistaken." "Am I?" The man reached into his jacket and Sarah tensed, but he only pulled out a photograph. "This is from 6 months ago. Denver, Colorado. Recognize him?" Sarah glanced at the photo and felt the world tilt. It was Jake, but he looked different. Younger, cleaner, wearing an expensive suit. He was shaking hands with a man she didn't recognize, but the building behind them looked official, government official. "Never seen him before," she said, but her voice came out smaller than she intended. The younger man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, lady, we know he's been coming here. We've been watching." "Watching?" The word slipped out before Sarah could stop it. "Oh yes," the older man said, his smile widening. "We've been very patient, but our patience is running out." Sarah glanced toward Jake's booth again, but it was empty. The newspaper lay folded on the table, and his coffee cup was still half full. He'd vanished like smoke. "Shit," the younger man muttered, following her gaze. "He's gone." The older man's expression darkened. "You warned him." "I didn't. Don't lie to me." His voice cracked like a whip, causing the other patrons to look over nervously. "You know what happens to people who interfere with our business?" Sarah's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man stood slowly, his hand moving inside his jacket again. "Maybe we should go somewhere quieter to discuss this." "That won't be necessary." The voice came from the kitchen doorway. Jake stood there, his hands visible and empty, but his entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the quiet ranch hand. In his place stood someone harder, more dangerous. "Jake," the older man said, his voice almost friendly. "There you are. We've been looking for you." "I know." Jake stepped further into the dining room, his movements careful and controlled. "What do you want, Marcus?" "You know what we want. You took something that belongs to us." "I took nothing that wasn't already mine." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not how Mr. Volkov sees it. You were supposed to deliver the files to Chicago. Instead, you disappeared. People are very unhappy about that." Sarah felt like she was watching a movie, but one where she couldn't understand the plot. Files. Chicago. Who was Volkov? The files contained evidence of what you people were doing. Jake said quietly. I couldn't let that stand. A conscience, Marcus said mockingly. Such an expensive luxury, especially for someone in your position. What position is that? Dead man walking. The younger man had his hand inside his jacket now, and Sarah realized with horror that he was reaching for a weapon. Not here, Jake said sharply. Too many witnesses. Marcus glanced around the diner, taking in the handful of elderly patrons who were now staring openly at the confrontation. You're right. This is a conversation better had in private. I'm not going anywhere with you. Oh, but you are. Marcus nodded towards Sarah. Because if you don't, Miss Martinez here is going to have a very unfortunate accident, and we both know you've grown attached to her welfare. Sarah's blood turned to ice. How did they know her name? How long had they been watching? Jake's jaw tightened. Leave her out of this. That's not how this works, Jake. Or should I say Agent Morrison? Agent. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Jake wasn't just a ranch hand with a mysterious past. He was, or had been, some kind of law enforcement officer. You have 10 seconds to decide, Marcus continued. Come with us quietly or watch Miss Martinez become collateral damage. Your choice. Sarah saw Jake's hands clench into fists. For a moment she thought he might fight, and part of her hoped he would. But then his shoulders sagged slightly, and she saw defeat in his eyes. All right, he said quietly. I'll come with you, but you leave her alone. Of course, Marcus said, his smile returning. We're not animals. We only hurt people who get in our way. As the three men moved toward the door, Jake caught Sarah's eye. Stay safe, he said quietly, and forget you ever knew me. The words hit her like a slap. After everything, after he'd defended her, after he'd been the first person in months to treat her like a human being, he was just going to disappear. Wait, she called out, but the door had already closed behind them. Through the window, Sarah watched them get into a black sedan with tinted windows. Jake was in the back seat, flanked by the two men. As the car pulled away, she caught a glimpse of his face through the glass. He was looking back at the diner, at her, and the expression on his face was one of profound regret. Then they were gone, leaving Sarah standing in the middle of the diner with her heart pounding and her mind reeling. The other patrons had returned to their meals, but she could feel their curious glances. Sarah? Old Pete Williams was looking at her with concern. You all right, honey? I'm fine, she said automatically. But she wasn't fine. She was anything but fine. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Sarah went through the motions of serving customers and cleaning tables, but her mind kept replaying the confrontation. Jake, Agent Morrison, had been living a lie. But why? What files had he stolen? And why had he chosen to protect her instead of fighting back? As closing time approached, Sarah found herself alone, with more questions than answers. She locked the diner's front door and turned off the lights, but instead of heading home to her small apartment, she found herself walking toward the payphone outside the gas station. She didn't know why she was doing it, but she dialed information and asked for the number of the Double R Ranch. When the ranch foreman answered, she asked about Jake Morrison. Jake? The man's voice was confused. Ma'am, I don't know anyone by that name. We got a John Martinez working here and a Jake Thompson, but no Jake Morrison. Sarah's heart sank. Even his job had been a lie. Thank you, she said quietly, hanging up. As she walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn from which there would be no return. For months, she'd been drifting through existence, accepting cruelty as inevitable, letting herself become smaller and smaller. But Jake's intervention had awakened something in her, and now, watching him sacrifice himself for her safety, she realized she couldn't go back to being the broken woman who poured coffee for her tormentors. Whatever was happening, whatever danger Jake was in, she couldn't just forget him. He'd shown her kindness when she'd forgotten it existed. He'd defended her when no one else would. Now it was her turn to do something brave. Sarah barely slept that night. Every sound outside her apartment, a car door slamming, footsteps on gravel, even the wind rattling her windows, made her heart race. She kept replaying the confrontation at the diner, analyzing every word, every gesture. By dawn, she'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. She was going to find Jake. The morning shift at the diner felt surreal. Sarah served coffee and scrambled eggs to the same customers who'd witnessed yesterday's drama, but no one mentioned it. In small towns, people had a way of pretending uncomfortable truths didn't exist. Tommy Brennan and his friends hadn't returned since Jake's intervention, which was the only silver lining in an otherwise dark situation. During her lunch break, Sarah drove to the Millbrook Public Library. The building was small and outdated, but it had internet access, something her landlord hadn't seen fit to provide in her apartment. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, looked surprised to see her. "Sarah, dear, how nice to see you here. Are you looking for anything in particular?" "Just need to use the computer, Mrs. Chen. Research for a personal project." The older woman's eyes crinkled with curiosity, but she simply nodded toward the computer station in the corner. "Take your time, honey." Sarah's fingers trembled as she typed "Jake Morrison, Federal Agent" into the search bar. The results were disappointing. Dozens of Jake Morrisons, but none that matched the man she knew. She tried variations. Agent Morrison, Denver. FBI Morrison, a DEA Morrison. Still nothing. Then she remembered the photograph Marcus had shown her. The building in the background had looked official, governmental. She tried searching for Federal Building, Denver, and found images of several possible locations. One caught her eye, the Byron G. Rogers Federal Building, home to multiple federal agencies. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing. If Jake had been working out of Denver, and if he'd stolen files about something called Volkov, then maybe there were news reports about missing evidence or a rogue agent. She spent the next hour searching through Denver newspaper archives, looking for any mention of missing files, corrupt agents, or anything involving someone named Volkov. Most of the search results were dead ends, but then she found something that made her blood run cold. A small article from the Denver Post dated 6 months ago. Federal agent found dead in hotel room. The agent's name was David Morrison, not Jake, but close enough to make Sarah's heart skip. The article mentioned that Agent Morrison had been investigating organized crime activities in the Denver area before his death, which was ruled a suicide. But Sarah knew better. If the men who'd taken Jake were willing to threaten her to get to him, they certainly wouldn't hesitate to kill a federal agent. The sound of someone clearing their throat made her jump. Mrs. Chen was standing behind her, looking concerned. "Sarah, are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," Sarah said quickly, closing the browser window. "Just researching something for a friend." Mrs. Chen's expression suggested she wasn't convinced, but she nodded politely. "Well, let me know if you need any help." As Sarah drove back to the diner, her mind was spinning. If David Morrison was dead, then who was Jake? A partner? A brother? Someone else entirely who'd taken on the Morrison identity? The afternoon passed slowly. Sarah found herself constantly checking the clock, eager for closing time so she could continue her investigation. She'd decided to drive out to the area where Jake had claimed to work, hoping to find someone who might know him by another name. At 6 o'clock, Sarah locked up the diner and headed south on Highway 287. The Double R Ranch was easy to find, a large spread with a weathered sign and a long gravel driveway. She pulled up to the main house, a modest 2-story building surrounded by barns and outbuildings. A man in his 60s emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a towel. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors. "Help you?" he asked, his tone friendly but cautious. "I'm looking for information about someone who might work here," Sarah said, getting out of her car. Tall man, brown hair, about 30. He's been calling himself Jake Morrison. The man, presumably the ranch owner, shook his head. "Like I told you on the phone yesterday, ma'am, we don't have anyone by that name, but..." He paused, studying her face. "You're the girl from the diner, aren't you? The one with the..." He caught himself, looking embarrassed. "The eye patch, yes," Sarah finished. "I'm Sarah Martinez." "Tom Reynolds," he said, extending his hand. "And you know what? Now that I think about it, there was a fella came around here about 3 months ago. Didn't give his name, but he was asking about work. Said he had experience with horses and cattle." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What did he look like?" "Fits your description. Tall brown hair, quiet type, but I couldn't hire him. He didn't have proper papers. No social security card, no references. Seemed like a decent enough fellow, but..." Tom shrugged. "Can't run a ranch on decent, need documentation." "Did he say where he was staying?" "Matter of fact, he did. Mentioned he was renting the old cabin out behind Miller's place. You know it? About 2 miles east of here, down a dirt road." Sarah knew the Miller property, an abandoned farm with a small caretaker's cabin. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. You've been very helpful." As she drove toward the Miller place, Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. What was she doing? She was a small-town diner waitress with one eye, not some kind of detective. But the image of Jake being forced into that black sedan kept playing in her mind. The Miller property was overgrown and neglected, but Sarah could see tire tracks leading to the cabin. She parked behind a stand of trees and approached on foot, her heart hammering. The cabin was small and rustic, with a single window and a wooden door that had seen better days. Sarah knocked, but there was no answer. She tried the handle and found it unlocked. The interior was sparse but clean. A bed with military-precise corners, a small table and a chair. But what caught Sarah's attention was the wall above the table. It was covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like official documents, all connected by red string like something from a detective movie. Sarah moved closer, studying the display. At the center was a photograph of a man in an expensive suit, older, maybe 60, with silver hair and cold eyes. The name Viktor Volkov was written beneath it in Jake's handwriting. Surrounding Volkov's picture were dozens of other photographs, men in suits, buildings, what looked like surveillance photos. Sarah recognized some of the faces from news reports, politicians, businessmen, people she'd seen on television. One photograph made her gasp. It was Marcus, the man who'd taken Jake from the diner. He was shaking hands with a man in a police uniform, both of them smiling for the camera. Sarah began reading the documents pinned to the wall. They were copies of financial records, shipping manifests, and what appeared to be intercepted communications. The picture they painted was of a vast criminal organization with connections reaching into law enforcement, politics, and legitimate business. A noise outside made Sarah freeze, footsteps on gravel getting closer. She looked around frantically, but there was nowhere to hide in the small cabin. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. "I know you're in there," a voice called out. Not Marcus or his partner, but someone else. "Come out slowly, hands where I can see them." Sarah's mind raced. Should she run? Try to hide? But the voice sounded official, authoritative. Maybe it was someone who could help. She opened the door slowly, hands raised. Standing in the clearing was a woman in her 40s, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses. She had the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. "Sarah Martinez?" the woman asked. "Yes, I'm Agent Lisa Crawford, FBI. I need to talk to you about Jake Morrison." Sarah's relief was so intense she nearly collapsed. "Thank God, I was trying to find him. These men took him yesterday and I've been trying to figure out who he really is." Agent Crawford's expression was unreadable. "What men?" "Two of them. The older one called himself Marcus. They said Jake had stolen some files, something about someone named Volkov." The agent's posture stiffened. "You need to come with me. Now." "Why? What's happening?" "Jake Morrison, or rather Agent Michael Torres, is in serious danger, and by involving yourself in this, Ms. Martinez, so are you." Sarah felt the world tilt. Agent Torres? Jake Morrison was his cover identity. Michael Torres is a federal agent who's been undercover for the past 8 months, investigating Viktor Volkov's organization. 3 days ago, he was supposed to deliver crucial evidence to our field office in Dallas. Instead, he disappeared. "He was protecting me," Sarah said quietly. "At the diner. These men, they were going to hurt me to get to him." Agent Crawford's expression softened slightly. "Which is exactly why you need to come with me. Volkov's people don't leave loose ends." Sarah looked back at the cabin, at the evidence wall that represented months of dangerous work. "Can you get him back?" "We're trying, but we need your help. You're the only person who witnessed his capture, and there's something else. Something that might be our only chance to save him." "What?" Agent Crawford pointed to the evidence wall. "Michael told us he had a backup of all the files, hidden somewhere only he knew about. If we can find it, we can proceed with the operation without him. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." Sarah thought about her small apartment, her job at the diner, the simple life she'd built after losing everything in the accident. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Now, for the second time in less than a year, her world was being turned upside down. But this time, she wasn't going to be passive. "I'll help," she said firmly. "But I want to know everything. Who is Viktor Volkov? What did Jake, Michael, discover? And how do we get him back?" Agent Crawford nodded approvingly. "We'll start with what we know. But first, we need to get you out of here. This place isn't safe anymore." As they walked toward Crawford's black SUV, Sarah took one last look at the cabin. Somewhere out there, Michael Torres was in the hands of dangerous men, possibly facing the same fate as the real Jake Morrison. But for the first time since the accident, Sarah felt like she had a purpose beyond just surviving. She was going to help save the man who'd saved her. The FBI safe house was a nondescript ranch-style home on the outskirts of Austin, surrounded by tall fences and security cameras. Agent Crawford had driven through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee, while Sarah tried to process everything she'd learned about Viktor Volkov's criminal empire. "Volkov came to the United States 15 years ago," Crawford explained, As they sat in the safe house's kitchen, a laptop opened between them. Officially, he's a legitimate businessman. Import, export, real estate, several restaurants. Unofficially, he runs one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in the Southwest. Sarah studied the photographs on the screen. Volkov at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at grand openings. He looked like any other successful businessman. What kind of crimes? Sarah asked. Money laundering, human trafficking, drug distribution, and murder, Crawford said bluntly. But he's smart, he keeps his hands clean, uses intermediaries, and has people in law enforcement on his payroll. Sarah thought about the photograph she'd seen in Michael's cabin, Marcus shaking hands with a police officer. Like Marcus Petrov is Volkov's right-hand man, ex-military, completely ruthless. And yes, he has contacts in several police departments across Texas and Colorado. Crawford's expression darkened. That's how they knew Michael was getting close. How long has Michael been undercover? 8 months. He infiltrated the organization through their Denver operations, working his way up until he had access to their financial records and communication networks. Crawford pulled up another file on the laptop. 3 weeks ago, he uncovered something big enough that Volkov's people started getting nervous. The file contained shipping manifests and financial transfers, but the numbers meant nothing to Sarah. What did he find? Evidence that Volkov's organization has been working with corrupt officials to traffic undocumented immigrants. They charge desperate families thousands of dollars for safe passage to the United States, then force them into slave labor to pay off inflated debts. Sarah felt sick. How many people? Hundreds, maybe thousands over the past 5 years. Crawford's voice was tight with anger. The operation was supposed to shut down this week. Michael was going to deliver the evidence to our Dallas office, and we were going to coordinate raids across 3 states. But he disappeared instead, because of you. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? Crawford's expression softened. I didn't mean it like that. What I meant is Michael made a choice. He'd been maintaining his cover for months, never breaking character, never letting personal feelings interfere with the mission. But when Volkov's people threatened you, he chose your safety over the operation. Sarah stared at the laptop screen, seeing her own reflection in the dark monitor. So this is my fault? No. Crawford's voice was firm. This is Volkov's fault, and Petrov's fault, and the fault of every corrupt official who looked the other way for money, not yours. But Sarah couldn't shake the guilt. If she'd been stronger, if she'd handled Tommy's harassment differently, if she hadn't needed defending. Where do you think they're holding him? She asked. Crawford pulled up a map on the laptop. We're tracking 3 possible locations. Volkov owns a warehouse complex near Houston, a ranch outside San Antonio, and a compound in the Hill Country. The problem is, we don't have enough evidence to get search warrants for all of them, and if we guess wrong, she didn't need to finish the sentence. If they guessed wrong, Michael would be dead before they found him. You said something about backup files, Sarah said. Files that only Michael knew about. Right. He told his handler, Agent Richardson, that he'd hidden copies of everything in case something happened to him, but he never got the chance to reveal the location. Sarah thought about the cabin, about the meticulous way Michael had organized his evidence. He was methodical, careful. If he'd hidden backup files, he would have chosen somewhere safe but accessible. Did he ever mention any places that were important to him? Somewhere he might have felt safe? Crawford shook her head. Michael Torres has been deep undercover for so long, we're not sure what's real anymore. His entire identity for the past 8 months has been Jake Morrison, quiet ranch hand from Texas. Before that, he was Miguel Santos, low-level criminal, trying to work his way into Volkov's organization. What about before the undercover work? His real life? Grew up in El Paso, parents deceased, no siblings, joined the FBI straight out of college. Crawford looked frustrated. There's nothing obvious, no family home or childhood hideout. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember every conversation she'd had with Michael. He'd been so careful to maintain his cover, but there had been moments, small glimpses of the real person beneath the facade. The diner, she said suddenly. What about it? He came to the diner every day for 3 months. Same order, same booth, same routine. But why that diner? There are other places to eat in Millbrook, closer to where he was staying. Crawford leaned forward, interested. Go on. And that first day he defended me against Tommy. He didn't just tell them to stop. He told them to finish your coffee and leave, like he had some kind of authority. Sarah's mind was racing now. What if he wasn't just hiding at the diner? What if he was protecting something there? You think he hid the files at the diner? Maybe, or nearby. Sarah stood up, pacing. He always sat in the corner booth, the one with the best view of the parking lot and the street. It's where someone would sit if they were watching for threats. Crawford was already reaching for her phone. "We need to get back to Millbrook." "Wait." Sarah grabbed her arm. "If I'm right and Volkov's people figure it out too, they'll be watching the diner. Going back there is dangerous." "Everything about this is dangerous," Crawford said grimly. "But if those files are there, they're our only chance to save Michael and shut down Volkov's operation." The drive back to Millbrook took 3 hours. Crawford had called for backup, but the nearest FBI agents were still an hour behind them. As they approached the town limits, Crawford pulled over. "I want you to stay in the car," she said, checking her weapon. "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "If the files are hidden in the diner, I'm the only one who knows every inch of that place. You'll need me." Crawford looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. "Stay behind me, do exactly what I say, and if I tell you to run, you run." They parked behind the gas station, using the building as cover while they observed the diner. From the outside, everything looked normal. Mel's old pickup was in the parking lot. He usually came in early to prep for the breakfast rush. But Sarah noticed a black sedan parked across the street, one that hadn't been there yesterday. "That's not a local car," she whispered. Crawford pulled out binoculars, studying the sedan. 2 occupants, both male. They're watching the diner. "So we're too late?" "Not necessarily. They're watching, not searching, which means they're not sure either." Crawford lowered the binoculars. "Is there another way into the diner?" Sarah nodded. "There's a back door that leads into the kitchen. Mel never locks it during business hours." They circled around behind the building, staying low and using parked cars for cover. The back alley was empty, except for dumpsters and delivery trucks. Crawford moved like a professional, her weapon drawn but held low. The kitchen door was unlocked, just as Sarah had predicted. They slipped inside, the familiar smell of bacon grease and coffee hitting Sarah like a wave of nostalgia. How different everything looked now, knowing that her quiet life here had been touched by international crime and federal investigations. "Where would he have hidden them?" Crawford whispered. Sarah looked around the kitchen, trying to think like Michael. Somewhere safe but not obvious. Somewhere that wouldn't be disturbed by daily operations, but that he could access regularly. Her eyes fell on the coffee machine, an ancient industrial model that had been there since Mel bought the place. Behind it was a small space just big enough for maintenance access. Sarah knelt down and reached behind the machine. Her fingers found something that didn't belong, a small waterproof pouch taped to the back panel. "Got it," she whispered, pulling out the pouch. Inside were 2 USB drives and a handwritten note. Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized Michael's careful handwriting. "If something happens to me, give these to Agent Crawford. Tell her the ranch outside San Antonio is a decoy. The real operation is at the Hill Country compound." Crawford read the note over Sarah's shoulder, her expression grim. He knew they were getting close. A sound from the dining room made them both freeze, footsteps and voices speaking in low tones. "They're inside," Crawford breathed. Through the kitchen door's window, Sarah could see 2 figures moving through the dining room, not Marcus and his partner, but 2 new men. They were searching methodically, overturning tables and chairs. Crawford was already on her radio, calling for immediate backup, but Sarah knew it would take time for help to arrive, time they might not have. "There's a cellar," Sarah whispered. "We can get out through the storm doors." But as they moved toward the cellar entrance, one of the men in the dining room spotted them through the kitchen window. "Found them!" he shouted. Crawford pushed Sarah behind the prep counter just as the kitchen door burst open. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Gunshots erupted, the sound deafening in the small space. Sarah pressed herself against the floor, clutching the USB drives to her chest. These small pieces of technology contained evidence that could save hundreds of people and bring down a criminal empire. But first, they had to get out alive. "Stay down!" Crawford yelled, returning fire from behind the industrial dishwasher. Sarah looked toward the cellar door. It was only 10 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. Between the gunfire and shouting, she could hear sirens in the distance, backup finally arriving. But she had a sinking feeling it might be too late. The gunfight at the diner lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When the backup agents finally stormed in, they found Crawford wounded but alive, and Sarah clutching the USB drives that would change everything. The 2 gunmen were dead, their phones revealing frantic communications with someone at the Hill Country compound. Now 12 hours later, Sarah sat in an FBI command vehicle parked on a ridge overlooking Victor Volkov's sprawling compound. The facility stretched across 50 acres of Texas hill country, disguised as a luxury retreat center. But the high fences, guard towers, and armed patrols told a different story. Thermal imaging shows approximately 40 people inside the main building, Agent Richardson, Crawford's superior, reported. He was a tall man with grey hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from decades of law enforcement. Half appear to be guards, the other half are likely the trafficking victims Michael discovered. Crawford, her left arm in a sling from the diner shootout, studied satellite photos on a tablet. "Where do you think they're holding Michael?" "The basement level of the main building," Richardson said, pointing to the blueprints they'd obtained from county records. "It's the most secure area, and our surveillance equipment detected what looks like holding cells." Sarah stared at the compound through binoculars, her stomach churning. Somewhere in that maze of buildings, Michael was being held prisoner, possibly tortured for information about the FBI's investigation. The thought made her sick with guilt and rage. "The assault team is in position," Richardson continued. "We'll move in 30 minutes, coordinate with local law enforcement and ICE for the victims." "I want to go with them," Sarah said suddenly. Richardson looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Absolutely not. You're a civilian. I'm the only person here who knows Michael well enough to recognize him if they've hurt him." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "And I'm the reason he's in there." "Ms. Martinez," Richardson's voice was gentle but firm, "this is a federal operation involving armed criminals. We can't—" "She has a point," Crawford interrupted. "If Michael is badly injured, if his appearance has been altered, Sarah might be our best chance of identifying him quickly." Richardson frowned. "It's too dangerous." "Everything about this has been dangerous," Sarah said, echoing Crawford's words from the day before. "But those people in there, the trafficking victims, they're in the same situation I was. Powerless, afraid, with no one to speak for them. The only difference is my prison was just smaller." The words surprised even Sarah herself. When had she started thinking of her life at the diner as a prison? When had she begun to see her acceptance of cruelty as its own form of captivity? Richardson studied her for a long moment. "If, and I mean if, you come with us, you stay with the rescue team handling the victims. You do not, under any circumstances, engage with armed hostiles. Clear?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. "Clear." The assault began at dawn. Sarah followed behind the victim rescue team, wearing a bulletproof vest that felt impossibly heavy. The FBI's intelligence had been accurate. The compound's guards were caught completely off guard by the coordinated attack from multiple directions. The main building was a converted ranch house that had been expanded into a sprawling complex. As the assault team secured each section, Sarah heard the sounds of combat echoing through the halls, shouting, running footsteps, the occasional gunshot. "Basement secured," came the report over the radio. "We've found the holding cells." Sarah's team descended a narrow staircase into what had once been a wine cellar. Now it was something much darker, a long corridor lined with metal doors, each with a small window at eye level. The air was thick with the smell of fear and human suffering. "My God," whispered Agent Martinez, the team leader. "How many people are down here?" They began opening doors systematically. Behind each one they found trafficking victims, men, women, and children who'd been promised safe passage to America, but instead found themselves trapped in forced labor. Some had been there for months. Sarah helped translate for the Spanish-speaking victims, her high school language classes finally proving useful in a way she'd never imagined. Many of the people were too traumatized to speak, but gradually, with gentle encouragement, they began to emerge from their cells. "There's one more door," Agent Martinez called out. "End of the hall." This door was different, heavier with additional locks. When they opened it, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Michael was chained to the wall, his face so bruised and swollen, she almost didn't recognize him. His clothes were torn and bloodied, and he was unconscious. "Michael!" Sarah rushed forward, but Martinez held her back. "Let the medic check him first." The team medic, a woman named Rodriguez, quickly assessed Michael's condition. Multiple contusions, possible broken ribs, but he's breathing normally, he's alive. As Rodriguez worked to free Michael from his restraints, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment he seemed confused, disoriented. Then his gaze found Sarah, and despite everything, he smiled. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Of course I came," Sarah said, kneeling beside him as the medic finished her initial assessment. "Did you think I'd just forget about you?" Michael tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "The files. Did you find them?" "We found them. The operation is over, Michael. Volkov's been arrested, and his entire organization is being rolled up." Relief flooded Michael's face. "The victims? Safe, all of them?" Sarah took his hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "You did it. You saved them." "We did it," Michael corrected. "If you hadn't figured out where I hid the backup files—" "All right, let's get him out of here," Rodriguez interrupted. "He needs a hospital." As they helped Michael to his feet, supporting him between them, Sarah caught sight of movement in the shadows at the far end of the corridor. A figure emerged from a hidden alcove, Marcus Petrov, blood on his face and a gun in his hand. "Nobody moves," Marcus snarled, "or the hero dies." The rescue team tensed, but they were in an impossible position. The corridor was narrow, with civilians behind them and limited cover. Any gunfight would endanger the trafficking victims they'd just freed. "Let them go, Marcus," Michael said, his voice stronger now. "It's over. Your boss is in custody. Your operation is finished." "Maybe," Marcus said, his eyes wild with desperation, "but I can still take a few of you with me." Sarah saw the gun swing toward Michael and acted without thinking. She stepped forward, placing herself between them. "You want to shoot someone," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Shoot me. I'm the one who ruined everything for you." "Sarah, no." Michael tried to move in front of her, but his injuries made him too slow. Marcus laughed, a bitter sound. "The little one-eyed waitress thinks she's a hero now. I think I'm someone who's tired of letting bullies win," Sarah replied. "I spent months letting people like Tommy Brennan make me feel worthless. I'm not going to let someone like you hurt the first person who treated me like a human being." For a moment, Marcus seemed genuinely confused by her response. In that instant of hesitation, Agent Martinez made his move. His shot was clean and precise. Marcus dropped without firing a single round. The rescue was over. Hours later, at the hospital in Austin, Sarah sat beside Michael's bed while doctors finished treating his injuries. Crawford was there too, her arm still in a sling, completing paperwork that would ensure the trafficking victims received proper care and legal protection. 43 people, Crawford reported, 43 human beings who thought they were going to die in that basement. Because of you two, they're going home to their families. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his hospital bed. "I was just doing my job." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You went beyond your job when you protected me at the diner. You chose to blow your cover rather than let them hurt me. And you chose to put yourself in danger to save him," Crawford added. "Neither of you was just doing a job." Through the hospital window, Sarah could see the sun setting over Austin, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what came next. The diner would be closed for weeks while it was repaired from the gunfight damage. Her quiet life in Millbrook was over, but for the first time since the accident, that didn't terrify her. "What will you do now?" Michael asked, as if reading her thoughts. Sarah considered the question. A week ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could handle another day of Tommy Brennan's cruelty. Now she'd helped bring down an international criminal organization and saved dozens of lives. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know I'm not going back to just pouring coffee and pretending I don't matter." Michael reached for her hand. "You've always mattered. It just took the right circumstances for you to see it." Crawford cleared her throat. "Actually, I might have a suggestion. The FBI could use someone with your language skills and unique perspective on victim advocacy, if you're interested." Sarah looked at Michael, then at Crawford, then out at the Texas sunset. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken woman who thought her life was over. Now she was being offered a chance to help other people rebuild theirs. "Tell me more," she said.